It had been 2 years since the last time I attempted this journey to the dirt tracks north of Broken Hill. Joining me on this trip was my son, who was acting as navigator. The last time Reese was in this part of the country was 26 years ago, when I took him and my daughter Stacey to Milparinka National Park, which lies to the northeast of town.
Did you see that? Did you hear the car?
Yeah. Our first stop was near Fowler's Gap, where a large cordella, or what is known locally as a jump up, could be seen to the west of the road. I'd lost sight of Reese until I realised he was actually climbing to the top.
I made it to the top of the mountain. I suppose this was a much bigger mountain at one stage.
There were quite a few kilometres to our next stop. We're at the northern end of an emergency runway, and the runway is part of the Silver City Highway, and I can honestly say I've never seen anything like that. When I return to a location years after my previous visits, I can't help making comparisons. Milparinka has been a town in decline since the 1930s. I came through this area in 1987 and again in 92. On the first visit, there seemed to be more buildings, or to be more precise, more ruins. To say this town has seen better days is an understatement. There are only a few buildings remaining that date back to the 1880s. The Milparinka courthouse was built of local sandstone in 1886. Why were people here in the first place? Gold, and lots of it. The precious metal was discovered in the 1870s and a gold rush commenced soon after. The police were the official gold escorts, and by the end of the gold rush they had transported over 10,000 ounces of gold from the field. The population grew to around 3,000 and was serviced by a newspaper, police station, chemist, 2 butchers and 4 hotels. Only the Albert Hotel remains open for business today. In the 90s, there were no signs indicating where the streets were. Now we were walking over open ground with signposts everywhere telling the story of this outback town.
Hello everybody. Dad's taken us to a little town called Milparinka. He said it's the closest thing we have to a real life ghost town in Australia. So here we go, Milparinka. It consists of a house and a pub and an information centre.
Next to the courthouse in Loftus Street are the old police barracks, which date back to 1885. What do you think?
Huh?
What do you think?
I think it was a great place. Great place to live. Population of 8.
8.
Probably.
Did you read about some of the stories about the area?
I read who owned that house.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're pioneers of some sort. They enjoyed themselves a bit, and then they left.
Then they left. Why
Yeah.
they leave? Any idea?
No, I don't know why they left.
At the end of the street are the ruins where the Baker family once lived and worked. Gold prospectors that didn't strike it rich sometimes turned to supplying the miners with goods. The Baker family recognised this opportunity and in 1890s opened a store.
Has a fireplace. Maybe it was a kitchen. I think I'll buy it. It's nice. Nice solid walls.
Although the diggings were largely abandoned by 1893, the store operated until the 1920s. In 1845, Captain Sturt held the conviction that Australia's interior was occupied by a central inland sea. To prove this theory, he led a party of 16 men, 11 horses and 30 bullocks into this area. Unfortunately, they arrived during a severe drought and could not proceed any further because water was so scarce. For the next 6 months they were stranded at Depot Glen beside the Preservation Creek, which at the time was the only significant body of water in the area. We followed the signpost that took us over a rough stony track northwest of town. I realised although the track hadn't improved, the addition of signposts made it easier to find our way on this journey into history.
This is a real adventure.
In 1987, this track was the beginning of my many trials and tribulations with the car I was driving at the time. On that trip, I lost my exhaust and had to retrace my route back to Milparinka without seeing anything of note.
I was on my way out to Depot Glen when this happened.
Reese and I found the general area where Sturt made his camp and discovered the waterhole had dried up. New South Wales is experiencing yet another drought. In 1992, I also made it to Depot Glen, which at the time did have water.
This waterhole here probably looks similar to any other waterhole that you find out in the Outback, but this particular one has a special interest. This is where Depot Glen is situated, about just over 12 kilometres away from Milparinka.
A few kilometres to the east is the lonely grave of James Poole, Sturt's second in command, who died of scurvy. His body is buried close to a tree that now bears his initials and the year 1845. Every now and again I caught sight of Reese on one of the ridges overlooking the area. I was pleased to see he was taking an interest in his surroundings. What went through the minds of these explorers while trudging across this landscape? To a certain extent it can be understood by my son's own exploring. He just had to see what was over the next ridge, even though history told him that the sea had dried up millions of years ago.
I'm impressed.
In the 1880s, these European men had no such knowledge, and their eagerness to climb the next ridge in hope of seeing the glimmering surface of water must have driven them on day after day.
All of the rocks that you brought home. Now I know where you got them from.
Did you go to the top of the ridge?
I went up there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw a cattle station.
Yeah, that's Mount Poole.
Oh, right.
My last visit to Mount Poole was in 1992, and I was now ready to start my third attempt to find that elusive cairn.
peaks here.
At the top of the rise, the landscape levels out for a short time. Looking back, we could see the white Hyundai standing out in stark contrast to the red plain stretching out to the horizon. I'm not sure how long we were on Mount Pool, but for a time it looked like we weren't going to find that cairn again. The summit is actually hidden from view at this level. After a short break, we started climbing for the highest point of the mountain. I would rather that my bones had been left to bleach in the desert than have yielded an inch of ground I had gained at so much expense. I little thought when I was engaged in that work that I was erecting Mr. Pool's monument, but so it was. That rude structure looks over his lonely grave and will stand for ages as a record of all we suffered in this dreary region to which we were so long confined. It's up here. After all this time of searching for it, it's where it should be, on top of the mountain. Mount Pool we're on top of, and it was Sturt and his expedition that built this cairn to relieve the boredom of their 6-month stay in Depot Glen, which is just further down the track. It took us a while to find this place, but as I said before, it had to be at the top. And it's a pretty desolate area. The scrub has kind of really disappeared from this area, and just the remnants of trees in the foothills of this Mount Pool. And when I came the second time, I couldn't find it. So I'm so happy to find a bunch of rocks on the top of a hill in the middle of nowhere.
I thought I'd seen the Outback. Not like this. This is completely different. This is like terrain I've never even seen before. It's got to be the second most inhospitable place I've ever been in my life. So much land, and you couldn't live here. You couldn't function here, let alone explore out here. No wonder people died out here on their way. Somewhere along the line, I can't help but think you'd look out and go, this is not possible, but these people just went off and did it. That is, I can't figure it out. I can't even work out whether it's stupidity or bravery, really. And the little rock thing up there had a little plaque, and the word I found most interesting out of the whole little plaque of 20, 30 words or whatever was this place that we are confined in. Confined is not a word I would associate with this. They were stuck. They were legitimately stuck. Out here. Absolutely terrifying. It's got to be one of the most craziest places I've ever been. I'm in shock. I'm fascinated. Maybe that's what it was. Can't work it out.